Hello, Archie Dunlop here with Talking Astrology with Archie on Monday, July the 1st, 2024. Happy July! Now very recently, the presidency of Joe Biden has been under question, and people in the Democratic Party, as well as the media, have been speculating that maybe he's not going to be running for a second term. Indeed, there is pressure within the Democratic Party for him to step down, at least in terms of being the candidate for the November election. So one of the possible replacements for Joe Biden is the governor of Michigan, who is Gretchen Whitmer. And in this video, I want to look at her horoscope and consider whether she might be a suitable candidate. She is someone who is very much to the manner born. She was born in Lansing, the state capital of Michigan. Her father was, I think, head of the Michigan Department of Commerce. Her mother was an assistant attorney general in Michigan. So this is what she was born into. So you could say that she is very much part of the political establishment, very much part of the blob, as some people might say. And so she might be a perfect candidate. Just to continue with things, same old way. And so we do need to consider her. But before I look at Gretchen Whitmer, I want to look at the astrology and the I Ching for today, this first day of July. So here are the positions of the planets today, Monday, July the 1st, 2024. And wow, I think it would actually have been Princess Diana's birthday, July the 1st. So she would be, how old would Princess Diana be? Diana would have been 61 today. Victoria Nuland would also be 61 today. She's 60. Let's get this right. Diana would be 63 today. Victoria Nuland would also be 63 today because they're born on the same day. So Victoria Nuland, late of the State Department, one of the sort of instigators of America's war against Russia via its Ukraine proxy. So I suppose still have to say happy birthday to Victoria Nuland. Why not? Okay, so what's happening today, this Monday? The moon is very much in Taurus, right in the middle of the sign. So doesn't matter where your time zone is. And you can see that the moon is making a conjunction to Mars. So with the moon in Taurus, we're going to be, many of us, quite stubborn. We're going to be wanting things done our way. And it might feel as if that there isn't really much room for compromise. That's Taurus. Remember, Taurus is a fixed sign. And once we start something, we are going to want to finish it. Now, yes, it's not good to be stubborn, or at least not good to be too stubborn, but we shouldn't forget that Taurus, is the sign of the moon's exaltation. And so we have a great sense of the material universe, what we can touch. And the moon, yes, it makes a conjunction to Mars. It is making a conjunction to Mars. So for many of us, it can be quite an angry day. There are things to get annoyed about if we don't get our way. But it is important to be flexible because the moon is not just making a conjunction to Mars. It is actually making a sextile to Venus as well. So we've got this Venus sextile Mars aspect, which was exact over the weekend, but it's still around and the moon is picking it up. Moon making a conjunction to Mars, sextile to Venus. So that can help us make things happen, but in a smooth way without having to create some big conflict. And, also the moon is making a sextile to the sun. that sextile to the sun, okay, more at the beginning of the day, more if you're in Australia and New Zealand, but still, or Eastern Asia in general, but still, the moon is in a kind of sextile aspect. Taurus and Cancer, those two signs have a natural affinity with each other, so there's actually no reason why it can't be quite a harmonious day, regardless of where we are. So I think if we do find ourselves involved in an argument or a confrontation, we perhaps should try to step back. But maybe the situation was unnecessary in the first place. If you really feel you need to get something done, try all other means first, because I don't think that an obstinate and aggressive approach is actually necessary. Moon also makes a sextile to Saturn, so that creates a certain amount of stability, or it can do. So overall, I would have said that today needn't be dramatic. We don't want it to be dramatic. We just want to get our way. And that's really all that counts, isn't it? As well as being happy and feeling a sense of harmony. And I think with these planets in Taurus and Cancer, that's what we should be aiming for. We have every right to want to stick to our principles, but that doesn't mean to say that we have to be super obstinate. Now, there is another aspect, and that is Mercury quintile Mars. Quintiles are about trying to create things. Mercury is perhaps about our ideas, what we want to talk about. And with Mercury quintile Mars, we need to find a way to get our ideas out there. And it's like forcing it a little bit, making a special effort. It's all about creating the right style. So if you want something to happen, give it a little bit of force, but not too much force. Remember what I'm saying about Moon being sextile Venus, Moon sextile the Sun. We don't have to force things in such a way that people get annoyed. We just have to really make our ideas happen through a slow act of will. And that is the broad picture in terms of the main aspects going on today. I should also mention that Uranus is now getting ever closer to the fixed star Algol. It's now 46 minutes apart. It won't get there quite yet, but it's getting closer. And so with Uranus moving towards Algol over the next few weeks, we can expect things to become more difficult, particularly on a global stage. There is going to be more unpleasantness in the air, and that unpleasantness is going to be activated every time a planet hits Uranus, particularly by a hard aspect, whether it's a conjunction, square, opposition, semi-square, sesquiquadrate. So, for example, tomorrow, I think the Moon makes a conjunction to Uranus on Algol. So that could be a problem. In fact, I already discussed that in my video for the weekend. For the week, when I looked at the whole week in general. On Tuesday, which is tomorrow, there's Moon conjunct Uranus conjunct Algol, which I think could be difficult in certain places. I thought, particularly in the UK, for example. Now, looking at today from a heliocentric view, so let's switch the coordinate system and turn to the heliocentric. Well, so there is the Earth at 10:18 Capricorn. There is Mars at 10:35 Capricorn. So we've been tracking this Earth square Mars aspect day by day. And you can see that it's now getting really close. I think today might be the day it's exact, or maybe tomorrow. So aggression is starting. Things are hotting up. And, maybe with this moon conjunct Mars today, we can try our hardest, but there might be some kind of outburst. It's because I think just the world out there annoys us, or annoys many of us, and we want to change it, or we want to do something because it's not good enough. And people are going to be angry. I think that can't really be helped. Though possibly this Earth square Mars is going to be more of an issue tomorrow, because that's when we got Mars, on Tuesday, when we got Mars conjunct Uranus. On the other hand, we've got Moon conjunct Mars today. So I think we will start to feel that Earth square Mars. And that's another reason why we really need to try to be peacemakers. We don't want to upset people unless it's really necessary. And there are some other heliocentric aspects which aren't quite so tense. We've got Mercury is starting to make an opposition to Neptune. That opposition is going to be exact today and tomorrow. So Mercury opposition Neptune, well, we could get confused. Always a possibility of people getting confused with Mercury opposition Neptune. And yes, it could be us getting confused. It's there's Neptune. So we could find that we say things we don't mean. Although I suppose also Mercury opposition Neptune could be associated with telling lies. Some people find it difficult to tell the truth. We ourselves should be aware of that tendency. Yes, it's easy just in the short term to tell a lie. We probably don't think anyone's going to check on it, but they will, I think. So avoid telling lies today. And at the same time, be careful of other people telling lies. And as the heliocentric chart is very much about the collective, watch out for politicians telling lies. They're always telling lies. And finally, we have got a heliocentric trine between Venus and Neptune. That's quite a nice trine. I think that perhaps takes the edge off the Earth square Mars. It's more gentle. Perhaps we can just relate to people as they are. Yes, there might be some gentle deception, but provided we don't believe what people say, or at least take what they say at face value, I think we can get on well with other people. But perhaps it's just not a day really for trusting people. Remember, from a geocentric perspective, we've got stuff in Taurus, we've got Moon in Taurus, Mars in Taurus. Actually, Taurus is quite a trusting sign, but it shouldn't be too trusting. It's nice to trust people because it's nice and stable, but unfortunately there are things going on which might undermine that trust if we are not careful. Turning now to the 12 signs, I'm going to give you my forecasts for the 12 signs for today, which is July the 1st, 2024, and it's a Monday. Aries. There is a conjunction between the Moon and Mars in Taurus. So Mars is your ruler and the Moon is conjunct Mars. And so, Aries, I think that there is scope here for getting annoyed. A lot of things to get annoyed about. And I think that your annoyance may be intensified by a feeling that there's not much you can do. You'd like to make things happen quickly. You'd like to be able to assert yourself in a nice, smooth way, but it's hard work. And as a result, you might show anger, and that anger might come from frustration. But you perhaps need to ask yourself, why are you feeling frustrated? It may just be that you're frustrated because you're concerned about timescale. You'd like things to happen at a particular pace, quite a fast pace, but it's not going to happen because Mars is in Taurus. Your ruler is in Taurus. It is a slow sign. If you want things to happen with Mars in Taurus, you do need to be patient. And things are not going to be helped by the fact that from a heliocentric view, the Earth is square Mars. So you could see Mars as you, because Mars rules Aries, and then you can see Earth as perhaps the world in which you inhabit. It's that material universe in which you have to eke out your existence. And what's going on out there is annoying. It's at odds with the way you want it to be. Hence, this great scope for getting angry and sort of feeling frustrated. But it needn't be like that. Over the weekend, I was talking about Venus being sextile Mars. And, okay, that sextile between Venus and Mars is not exact anymore, but it's still pretty strong. It's still having an impact. Venus is less than 2 degrees away from the sextile of Mars. And so with Venus sextile Mars, we have to remember that Venus is a planet of relationships. It's in Cancer. And so you need to really focus on your social skills. So rather than get annoyed with people because they're not doing things your way, or perhaps not doing things as fast as you'd like them to be doing it, you need to understand them. You need to perhaps build up relationships. And that is the way to make progress. Firstly, you've got to get people onto your side. And this is something you can do. And it's not just because Venus is sextile Mars. It's because the moon is conjunct Mars and it's also sextile Venus. So that brings everything into focus. So focus on creating stability by creating stable relationships, stable contacts, and then at a later stage you'll find that it's much easier to get your way. And another aspect going on today is Mercury quintile Mars. So Mercury, the planet of communication, is making this quintile aspect to Mars. And Mercury's not just the planet of communication, it's also the planet of thought. What are you thinking about? You've got ideas. If you can just slow down, think about what your ideas are. And these ideas are about how you'd like the world to be. And your first impulse might be to think that you have these ideas and you want to bring them out right now. But it requires a bit of skill. It's great that you've got these ideas. These ideas are really powerful. They might be quite futuristic even. And they can certainly be helpful in terms of your interest. But getting these ideas out does require a little bit of thought and tact. So you might perhaps have to create the right style, because Mercury quintile Mars is about style. And that might be irritating, having to take on a particular style. You might take the view that substance is more important, but it's all about the impression you make. By creating the right impression, you will eventually get your way. Finishing up with relationships, I said over the weekend there's a sextile aspect between Venus and Mars. I said over the weekend that it makes you very charismatic. That Venus sextile Mars aspect is still in operation. Arguably, it's even stronger than over the weekend because the moon is now tied up with it. Moon conjunct Mars, moon sextile Venus. And because of that, I do think that today you actually are quite attractive and charismatic, like you were over the weekend, and just use this attraction and charisma. It's a time to get people on your side, and might take a bit of time, but once you've got people on your side, you could say that nothing can stop you. Taurus, there is focus on your sign because the moon is now in Taurus and the moon is making a conjunction to Mars, and it's making other aspects. It's making a sextile to Venus. So I think with this moon conjunct Mars, it does put you in a strong position. And it does also make you a little bit impatient. I think that you have decided that your way is best and that you want to make things happen, sort of perhaps bulldoze your agenda through. I suppose you can. If it's really important to you to get your way today, then I think that you can do it. And I think you'll be helped by the fact that you're going to be really very stubborn. With Moon conjunct Mars, you are not in the mood for compromise. I think in the first instance, you're actually not really in the mood to listen to people. It's all about you. And even if you're 100% in the right, it shouldn't be all about you. You do have to consider other people, especially on a day like this when the moon is not just making a conjunction to Mars, it's making a sextile to Venus. And Venus is your ruler. And you could say that Mars in your first house, in Taurus, is potentially about other people. And rather than get annoyed because you're not getting your way, you actually need to consider what's going on. In fact, some people really like you. They are gravitating towards you. They are ready to do things your way. But you mustn't take that situation for granted. You know, if you storm around the place like a Taurus in a china shop, that is not the way to do it. You're going to upset people. You're going to destroy your social capital, because you've got a lot of social capital, I think, at the moment. And so, Taurus, you just have to be subtle. Subtlety can be something that Taurians find difficult. You know, of all the 12 signs, I'd probably say that Taurus is the least subtle. It can be quite, not just blunt, it can actually be quite coarse as a sign. I hope you don't find that offensive. I suppose I have Taurus rising. I suppose I don't particularly regard myself as being coarse, but I suppose when I'm in a hurry, when I'm impatient, I sort of say things that are a bit blunt, but on those rare occasions. But you don't have to be blunt. You just need to use your charms. And today, Taurus, you have considerable charms with the moon making that sextile to Venus, you know. And because people, you know, and anyway, people want to be on your side. They want to do things your way. And so if you treat people nicely, they're almost certainly going to oblige. And in general, Taurus, relationships should work pretty well. You know, we've got Venus sextile Mars today, as we had over the weekend, but the moon is boosting that sextile with Mars because the moon is making the conjunction to Mars, it's making the sextile to Venus. So it's like through the power of who you are and through your raw charisma, you can bring people into your sphere of influence and you can create really good relationships. And I think you'll have a natural eye for which people are reliable and which people are going to let you down. So you're going to know. So if you have people around you who are going to let you down, you'll know who they are. And you can take the appropriate steps. If people are reliable, if they are a real brick, I think that's an English term, to be described as a brick. I've been described as a brick before. If someone calls you a brick, I think it means that you are super reliable. You're someone who can be trusted. So in that sense, there are lots of bricks around today, and that might include might include you. So, Taurus, don't be in too much of a hurry. I said the same thing to Aries. It's because of this moon conjunct Mars. Don't be in too much of a hurry, and really work on your social skills, because right now, Taurus, I think your social skills are very good, and if you want reliability, you can get it, and if you want to get your way, I'm confident that eventually you can. Gemini. It may be, Gemini, a day when you might kind of want to keep a low profile, perhaps a lower profile than usual. You know, things have been a little bit exhausting recently, haven't they? You know, we had all these planets in Gemini. All these planets are finally leaving Gemini. Well, they've left Gemini. All you've got left is Jupiter in Gemini. That's just all there is. And so, a Gemini, it just might be a time for reflection. And perhaps what you should do, Gemini, is concentrate on the single aspect that has a big impact on you. And that single aspect is a quintile between Mercury and Mars. So that quintile between Mercury and Mars, it's about you and your ideas, having ideas. Geminis always have ideas. The Gemini brain doesn't stop thinking. And some of your ideas about the way things should be are actually quite powerful, and they can happen out there in the real world. But the question is, you need to turn on the projector. So you've kind of got this inner projector in your brain, and you've got your ideas are like the slides, and you need to turn that projector on. And in the first instance, turning this projector on doesn't require a lot of interaction with the outside world. You just have to actually work on yourself. Then you turn the projector on. And what's happening is that you are projecting your ideas onto the world with a certain amount of force, because it's a kind of projector that sort of has a laser beam in it. And so you do that, you turn it on, and it becomes quite clear what you want. And with Mercury quintile Mars, a lot of it has to do with what you say. And while I do think that in many respects it's a day when you don't need to say very much, you don't necessarily have to be taking an active part in anything, a few choice words can make all the difference. So if you've got something to say, choose your words carefully, choose when you're going to say it, choose where you're going to say it, and choose who you're going to say it to. And so if you can make all the right choices, then those ideas can really hit home, and you can have a powerful impact. But just important, Gemini, that you don't say more than you have to, and just have that focus. We need laser beam projection, Gemini, and then I'm fairly confident that you really can start to get your way. In terms of about what, I think that there could be a financial dimension there, because the moon is making a sextile to Venus. It's kind of making a sextile to the sun as well. It's actually making a sextile to Saturn. And so that is more going to be about sort of money, maybe about ambitions, business, work, what you want to do. You can start to move things your way, but it's just got to be done in a way that is quite clever, and ideally you won't be right in the center of things, because if you're right in the center of things, you're going to feel self-conscious, and you might not come over in quite the right way. And so it's kind of better that you try to influence things from the sidelines. You'll be more effective that way. It might not seem like it, but you shouldn't underestimate, the sheer power of your personality. Just because you're not in the middle of things, it doesn't mean that you're not having a big influence. Cancer. I think it's a day when you have a fair amount of power at your disposal. The moon is making a conjunction to Mars. And of course, the moon is your ruler. And so with the conjunction to Mars, I believe that you're going to be quite assertive, very clear about what you want, but in such a way that you don't really have to have an argument about it. And when you're with other people, your desires will be clear and obvious. And I think you'll be helped by the fact that you yourself have great certainty. Certainty is important. I mean, I know certainty can be a disadvantage, because if we're too certain about things, we might just become too obstinate, and we end up chasing something which is an absurdity and could get us into trouble. But I think in your case, it's okay to be certain. Okay, you don't have to be certain about everything. You just have to be certain, Cancer, about the things that matter. And through your certainty, you will attract attention. I suppose people will take the view, if you are certain about something, then it's got to be right. And you will almost have an aura of certainty. And where there is certainty, there is stability. And you are a force for stability. And the moon is not just making a conjunction to Mars, it is also making a sextile to Venus. And it's making a sextile to Saturn as well. So you're the person that can keep things under control. You're the person that, yes, can create stability. And I think that people will just gravitate towards you. We live in uncertain times, and people do want reassurance. And Cancer, you are really just the person to provide reassurance. And at the same time, you do have real power. And if something isn't going your way, with the moon conjunct Mars, you can assert power very quickly, very definitely, and a short blast of your power is just going to be enough to stabilize the situation. I think that if anyone's trying to contradict you, I think they'll just back off. Or maybe they'll just understand your point of view. And, in most cases with the moon sextile Venus, you'll be very good at smoothing ruffled feathers. So if anyone's upset or looking for an argument, you'll be just the person to calm them down. Even if they're upset because of you, it does happen. In terms of relationships, the moon is making a sextile aspect to Saturn. And of course, the moon is ruler of Cancer, your sign. Saturn is ruler of Capricorn, which is your opposite sign. So with moon sextile Saturn, it's a great day for getting on with people and for making sure that relationships are all in order. But with close relationships, just remember, it's not just about you asserting yourself. Yes, I do think that you are in a strong position because the moon is conjunct Mars, but that moon sextile Saturn kind of indicates to me that someone you know very well knows things that you don't, has a certain authority, certainly in some areas. And I do think that that authority needs to be respected. Now, if there's anything wrong with today, and I don't think there really is much wrong to do with today, it's just how you use the energy of Moon conjunct Mars. It is possible with the Moon conjunct Mars, because Mars is quite an aggressive influence, that there are moments when you get too angry. You just get annoyed, and your anger just gets a bit out of control, and you kind of spoil things. I think it would be unnecessary, because really that Moon conjunct Mars is your dynamo. It's what keeps you going today. It allows you to make things happen, but you need to be constructive and positive and work with other people. If you show any frustration, that could just spoil everything, but I think that would be so unnecessary. Cancer, you are an emotionally aware sign. I think you also, have self-awareness. And so just keep that Moon-Mars conjunction under control and make sure that it's always focused on on a constructive result. Leo, on the surface, you might feel that really not much is happening, that you don't really have to assert yourself. I suppose, one of the reasons for that might be that, you're still perhaps getting used to the fact that the sun is moving through Cancer, and from a Leo view, Sun in Cancer, it is just a time when things are a little bit slow, or at least it might feel that things are a bit slow. But there are other things going on, and there are always opportunities. And today, Leo, there is a conjunction between the Moon and Mars in Taurus. And Taurus in the Leo chart it's very high profile. It's out there. It's noticed. It may apply to your ambitions, what you want. So although part of you feels that you don't really want to do anything, maybe it's just you often feel like this at this time of year. Although that's true, there are things you want to happen. And that Moon conjunct Mars is something that you need to use. So if you've got a set of ambitions, something you want to happen, don't leave it till tomorrow. Try to see what you can do right now. Now, that doesn't mean to say that you have to, come out all guns blazing. No, it's not about that. It's about understanding the world and understanding the weaknesses in the world, perhaps people's weaknesses, or perhaps also understanding where the lines of least resistance lie. And that's, in fact, probably what you should be focusing on. If you have a particular goal, a particular aim, something you want to achieve, there are going to be probably numerous ways of achieving it. And you have to kind of work out which is the easiest way to achieve it. And the easiest way to achieve something is very often not the most dramatic way. Because if you adopt the dramatic way, perhaps coming out all guns blazing, if you adopt that approach, you are immediately attracting resistance, questions, opposition, and that's just not what you want. You want to take the slow way, the roundabout way, the way which doesn't draw attention to yourself. And using that approach, then I'm confident that you can really get good results. I won't say fast results, but they will be timely. They will happen, at their own pace, and I don't think you're going to be disappointed. Though I suppose I have to say, if you are working or doing anything to do with business, that Moon conjunct Mars could be a little bit of a problem. It may be that you have a clash, or you could have a clash, it's not guaranteed, with someone who has a different status in the organization than you. It may be that you and a superior or your employer will disagree, or maybe even you and a client will disagree about something if you're self-employed. But if you're in a position of authority, it could work the other way. You might have a disagreement with someone you're hiring, or someone under you, someone you're supposed to manage. So look out for those kinds of disagreements and try to anticipate them. I think you absolutely can anticipate them. You'll probably have hours of warning, and once you know that there's a potential problem, then you can work out what the best way to deal with the issue is, because we don't want arguments today. It's really unnecessary, and I'm telling this to everyone. It's not just you, Leo, but obviously with your chart, it has a particular emphasis, and I think in terms of it is probably to do with work, ambition, career, something like that. Although this conjunction between Moon and Mars is happening in Taurus, and there could be a reflex action on the empty sign Scorpio. And if there is such reflex action, that could have an impact on your family. So perhaps you and family members might not entirely agree with each other, because someone is trying to go too far too fast. Maybe you trying to go too far too fast, someone else trying to go too far too fast, and there just could be some kind of disagreement there. But again, it's just so important that you're able to anticipate it. And I should also say that Leo's at the moment, perhaps feeling a little bit under pressure, and the problem is that the Sun is making a sesquiquadrate to the Saturn-Pluto midpoint. It's a short-term thing. I wouldn't worry about it too much. But the Saturn-Pluto midpoint can be about tension, wanting to create change in a world which you feel is difficult to change. So you might feel that the only way to create change is to do something really dramatic, to force change. But I'm not convinced that that is the right approach. And if you want massive change, Leo, you probably have to start with yourself. You perhaps have to transform your own attitude, and then by transforming your attitude, perhaps a few of your behaviors, and perhaps recognizing that if you have any frustrations, it might actually be about yourself and your own reactions rather than what's going on in the outside world. So a bit of work on yourself might be useful, and that might be something that you need to consider, not just today, but throughout the rest of the time while the Sun is moving through Cancer, and then at the end of the month, 23rd of July or whenever the Sun moves into Leo, you'll be ready to really make things clear. You'll be back on form, and the Sun in Cancer time will be over, and with your ruler in Leo, in a way, the Leo season will start in earnest. But you've got a few weeks. In fact, you've got the best part of a month to be working on that. Virgo, you shouldn't be focusing too much on details. That's always a supposed issue with Virgo. concentrating too much on details. Okay, it is a little bit of a stereotype for Virgos. Details are important. I mean, Virgos have a good understanding of the world and its various components, but sometimes details can just be a little bit overwhelming, and you might start to focus on the wrong details, especially today maybe, because from a heliocentric view, Mercury, which is your ruler, is opposition Neptune. And so with Mercury opposition Neptune, you might have a feeling that you're not in full control. There are all these things going on that you don't really understand. You kind of know they're important, but you can't fit them together. And the problem might be that you're trying to think about everything at once. You're trying to think about 20 different details at once, and that is just impossible. It's just impossible to concentrate on that many things in a single second. So just focus on the things that matter, on perhaps one thing at a time. And at the same time, don't get too caught up on any one thing, and try to get an idea of the broad picture. Especially now, we've got, the moon making a sextile to the sun, and with the moon, okay, that was perhaps at the beginning of the day, and the moon makes a sextile to the sun, then it makes a sextile to Venus, and that is about being comfortable with the world at large and just having an acceptance that you haven't got all the answers, firstly, and secondly, if things appear to be chaotic, then it may not be the case that anything is wrong. It may actually be that what you're seeing is the world as it is. We live in a chaotic world. We live in a world where things don't always fit together, where things don't always make sense. And that is perhaps just part of the human condition. And Virgo, I do think that is something that you perhaps need to accept. So if you're going to have any battles today, I would choose them carefully. Choose battles in which you have genuine control, in which you can really make things happen. And in most cases, it's just not worth it. Just allow things to make sense. They don't make sense at the moment, not fully, but perhaps in a few days' time there will be greater clarity. Now, there is an aspect that I do need to draw your attention to, and that is a quintile aspect between Mercury and Mars. And that quintile between Mercury and Mars is talking about some of your ideas. That's Mercury. Mercury is you. And not just ideas, but some of your ambitions. You've got ambitions. There are things you would like to happen, and they are important to you. And Mercury quintile Mars is about finding the right way to bring your ambitions out there, into the open. And the obvious ways are not going to work, but it needs subtlety and it needs open-mindedness. So if you want something to happen, you've got to be open-minded, and you've got to think of new possibilities. Possibilities which you haven't considered. And it's all about the method. So perhaps the ideas and the ambitions aren't the problem. It's the process by which you make these ideas and ambitions actually happen. And the process isn't the usual process. At least it's not usual for you. You need to do things differently. And perhaps you need to learn from other people. Perhaps it's about technique, using techniques which may be very common in other parts of the world, but maybe are not so common in your part of the world. And if you use a different technique, a technique that is alien to your environment, you will have the advantage. Because if you use the same old methods, people are just going to say, well, that's Virgo, you, whoever you are, wherever you are, using the same old methods, we can deal with that. That's not a problem. But if you take an approach which is very different from what other people are used to, then you have a big advantage, and it's then that you can make your ideas actually happen in the real world. Libra, don't underestimate yourself. You might feel that there's not much you can do today. Perhaps it's the beginning of a week, you're still getting used to things, and you just need time to adjust. But really, Libra, you are strongly placed, and you're helped by the fact that the moon is making a sextile to Venus, and Venus, which is your ruler, is still sextile Mars. So over the weekend, Venus was sextile Mars, and it was this sextile between Venus and Mars was exact over the weekend, and it's now weakening a bit. But that Venus sextile Mars is still very much in force, and it's given a boost by the moon, because the moon today is making a conjunction to Mars, and it's also making a sextile to Venus. So you could say that in some respects, because of that lunar boosting, that the Venus-Mars sextile is actually stronger today than it was over the weekend. So it's important that you pack in as much as possible, and if there's something you want, something you need, you don't leave it. Don't just hold on hoping that the situation will get better. Maybe in some respects it's as good as it gets. So Libra, really take advantage of this opportunity, even if at first sight you don't really feel like it. It seems that you have this inner power, Libra. It may be an inner power that you're perhaps not entirely comfortable with, because it's perhaps not the usual you, being very intense, getting down to the foundations of who you are, perhaps thinking about your inner desires. It just might all be a bit too complicated, and Librans do like to sort of dwell on the surface, but it's not a time for dwelling on the surface. Just reach down, find that power, and then put it into practice. And once you connect everything, really, Libra, within reason, I think there's very little that you can't achieve. So don't hold back if you're, for example, if you're working today, or you're doing any kind of business, or you're doing any negotiations. I do think that you can gain the upper hand. You can gain the upper hand not just through the power of your personality, but through insight. You can really see what's happening, you can feel what's happening, and you're going to be helped by the fact that you've got heliocentrically, we have Venus is making a trine to Neptune. Venus trine Neptune heliocentrically, and Venus is your ruler. And so that Venus trine Neptune, it gives you access to knowledge that isn't usually available. It's knowledge about other people's strengths and weaknesses. it's also knowledge about the underlying currents going on in the world in which we live. And so, Libra, I just think it's just important that you take advantage of all the things that are on offer, and you do make a special effort to understand people and understand perhaps their weaknesses, and also understand your own weaknesses. I do understand that some Librans may actually today be feeling a little bit negative, and you might feel that there's no point, that things are difficult, and that it's all a bit frustrating. And that might be just how you come into the day. And so you have to get through that. It's like a thin layer of ice that has to be broken. Of course, if you get completely caught up in your negativity, then the great opportunities today would be wasted. And so perhaps we need to think about what that negativity might be about. And I think any negativity you have might actually be about your sensitivity, and it's another side of your strength. So your strength is to actually understand what's going on, to really get deep down, to go deep down, to understand people's motivations, people's strengths and their weaknesses. But when you're dealing with this kind of stuff, these quite heavy feelings, your first impulse might be to think, oh, well, this is too much, and things really are difficult, and there's no point in trying. But what you have to do is you have to go beyond your own negativity. That negativity is very surface level. You need to break through below that layer of ice, and then you find your strength. And Libra, once you find your strength, then I don't think anyone's going to be able to stop you. Scorpio. A lot of activity in Taurus, and Taurus is your opposite sign. So to be specific, we've got Moon conjunct Mars in Taurus, which is opposite to Scorpio. And so that does put the emphasis on other people. There are things people are doing which really you can't ignore. And I think that many Scorpios are going to feel a little bit annoyed. You're not going to like what people are doing. And I think this is perhaps a feature of Mars being in Taurus. Mars just is it right in the middle of Taurus. You've got quite a few weeks before Mars leaves Taurus. And so there is this just general irritation, and that people have an impact on you. You don't like the fact that people have an impact on you, and your first inclination might try to be quite defensive. But I don't think that's the right approach, because there are other things going on which are really quite positive. So over the weekend, there was a sextile aspect between Venus and Mars. Venus is a planet which represents the other, because Venus rules Taurus. Mars is, of course, you, because Mars rules Scorpio. And so over the weekend, you were, I believe, quite charismatic and attractive. I hope you made most of it. And this sextile is starting to break up. But today, on Monday, it gets back into focus. And that's because of the involvement of the moon. The moon makes a conjunction to Mars. Moon makes a sextile to Venus. And so, Scorpio, you are actually very attractive today. You continue to be attractive today. You you continue to be someone who is impossible to ignore. So if you are feeling that things aren't going your way, that other people are being unhelpful, then consider the possibility that you have the ability to change the situation. People are going to listen to you. You might not think they're going to listen to you, but they are. And so if you're not happy with the way things are going, Scorpio, then I'm fairly confident that you can change it. And you don't have to change it, by being super dramatic and melodramatic and making a fuss. You can just change it by being yourself and just by showing some sensitivity. And once you show a little bit of sensitivity, just perhaps indicate that you're making some attempt to understand what makes people tick. You don't have to be right. You don't have to make a big attempt, but I think it will be very much appreciated if you can make an effort to look at things from another person's point of view. And that appreciation will lead to respect, and in the end, you might be in a situation where people are actually prepared to follow you. You show some consideration and you are rewarded with trust. So do consider that. And maybe that is your goal for today. Your goal is to get people to trust you. Because really, people want to trust someone, and you are the person to trust. Now, as far as close relationships are concerned, I don't know whether close relationships are important to you, and I'm not just talking about romantic relationships. It's whatever the nature of a relationship. I actually think it can be a good day because Venus is still sextile Mars, Moon is conjunct Mars, Moon is sextile Venus, and so I do feel that relationships can really work really well, and certain relationships can be strengthened, and all that's required on your part is, consideration, plus a little bit of openness to something new. It may be that when you get really close to someone, you see a side to their personality, or perhaps just a side to their knowledge and experience that you hadn't been aware of. And at first it might be a bit disconcerting, but really it should be something intriguing. And if you take an interest in someone's knowledge and experience, I do think that will be very much appreciated. Sagittarius. It could be a somewhat slow day. I'm certainly not suggesting that it's going to be the absolute best day there is. I mean, there are opportunities today for sure, which I will come on to, but things might not happen at the pace you like. And there's a possibility, Sagittarius, that you start to feel really quite frustrated. Things are just happening at almost a snail's pace. And, being a Sagittarius, you're an action-orientated sign. You like variety. You like explosions, okay, within reason, but you want the spark, and it's not there. And with the Moon making a conjunction to Mars, the things you have to do are just going to annoy you, and it just might all seem incredibly tedious. So what do you do about the situation? Well, I suppose ideally you try to understand the Zen of it all. I mean, don't really ask me for details about Zen. I don't really get Zen. I'm not that kind of person. But I suppose the Zen of it all is understanding the spiritual value of even the most tedious task. I mean, don't comment, tell me I've misunderstood Zen. I'm not claiming to be an expert on Zen. I must make that clear. I think it was Gurdjieff, who was this sort of Russian mystic. I think it's sort of late 19th century, beginning of the 20th century. And Gurdjieff would kind of tell his followers, I think, to pick potatoes and to try to understand the spirituality of picking potatoes. This back-breaking work. But somehow, if you can go beyond that back-breaking work, okay, I'm certainly not advocating you pick potatoes or break your back, but if you go beyond a tedious task, you get involved in the tedious task and you start to elevate that tedious task and make it almost spiritual, then you can transform your attitude. And so through simplicity, you find some kind of spirituality. So perhaps that's what you need to do. You maybe need to decide what you're going to do, and something that might be very routine, decide on it, and then decide that you're going to give it everything you've got. So what you mustn't do is take a routine task and do it begrudgingly. Not giving it everything you've got, complaining that it should be someone else doing it, complaining that you haven't got enough help. Just taking this thing, whatever it is, giving it everything, giving it your love and your devotion, and in that process, the magic can happen. I'm talking about this in a very abstract, detached, verbal way, by the way, because I've read about this. I've understood that some people find it very valuable. It doesn't work for me, but you're a Sagittarius. You're probably far more spiritually aware than me, and you perhaps understand these words perhaps better than me myself. So do consider that as a possibility. On the downside, with the Moon conjunct Mars, it might make you somewhat accident prone. Now, I think that's particularly the case if you're feeling a little frustrated. You're feeling that things aren't working your way, and you might feel in your frustration, you might just push yourself, and at almost an unconscious level, it's like you maybe even want to do yourself an injury just to prove to the world that it's all wrong, and to prove to the world that you were right all along. So do resist that temptation and be very aware of your body all day long. Whatever you're doing, just be aware of where your feet are, where you're stepping, where your hands are, where you are placed in the world. Because it's when you are not aware, particularly if you're angry, that you can get yourself into trouble. Maybe you can trip, cut yourself, whatever you're doing that might have potential dangers. So I do think that a bit of awareness there is going to be important. And finally, don't underestimate yourself. And I talked about routine tasks and finding the zen in them, but you are talented right now. I mean, you're always talented, but your talents are really quite clear at the moment. And it may be that when you're doing something that's apparently rather boring, you're actually tuning into something relating to you and who you are and your creative purpose. And you might suddenly find that you're good at it, and that you've got a real talent, and it just comes from nowhere. And I think that you could be recognized. So you might feel that you're not being recognized at all. even that you're being taken for granted or ignored. I don't know which is worse, to be ignored or taken for granted, or are they both the same thing? I don't know. But actually, you are being noticed and you are making an impact and an impression, and I think soon enough that will become obvious to you. Capricorn, things are running quite smoothly as far as I can see. Perhaps more smoothly than they have in the past. So I think it's a day when you're going to feel a general satisfaction with what you're able to accomplish, provided you don't ever allow yourself to get angry. There is, when I say ever, I'm talking about today. There is this conjunction between the Moon and Mars today. And there is a possibility of anger, flashes of anger there. The Moon, remember, is ruler of Cancer, which is your opposite sign. So the Moon represents another person, and it represents, I think, another person who is actually quite energetic. And this person's energy and the way they're presenting themselves could, in the first instance, make you feel somewhat annoyed. And it's going to be very brief, but if you showed annoyance, then that would be really unfortunate and you'd be giving the wrong impression. And what you need to do, Capricorn, is in most cases to allow people to express themselves as they wish, even if to begin with you don't like what they're doing. And because I think that soon enough you'll start to see the broader picture, and there'll just be a sense of useful activity and I think mutual respect, mutual creative respect. I think it's a day when people can do things that are useful and clever and which are supportive, and it may actually be a great day for cooperation. Individuals cooperating, not as a group, not as a hive, but rather as individuals doing things which are special to them, but somehow all these special activities are linked together. And the Moon, having made this conjunction to Mars, which might be an energetic person, makes a sextile to Saturn. And so Moon sextile Saturn allows you to really get on with someone and be very constructive with them. So constructive activity is really indicated by this Moon conjunct Mars, then moving to a sextile of Saturn. And you might at first think that someone doesn't really respect you, but you just need to allow the thing to proceed. And when the action is over, you will actually reach the opposite conclusion. You will actually understand that you are respected. And if you're prepared to respect another person, then they will be prepared to respect you. And so mutual respect could be a very important part of what's happening today. Now, on a broader level, some Capricorns are drifting into speculation. Now, this is not something that Capricorns normally do, but at the moment, you're thinking about what is possible and also what you believe in. Maybe what you believe in a spiritual sense or in a political or a philosophical sense. And you are actually quite inspired by your beliefs. And this is a bit strange, but beliefs are important. You can be skeptical forever, but at some point you've got to take a stand. And these beliefs have to be worked on. So if you find yourself believing something or wanting to believe something, then I would urge you to go ahead, continue. But you have to refine your beliefs. Some aspects of your belief system are probably unrealistic, but it's not a situation where you have to just throw out the whole system. No, you just have to do some fine-tuning. And once you've done the fine-tuning, you've given it that practical edge. That's what Capricorns are really good at doing. A bit of realism. Realism is just that's an important part of the Capricorn experience, or it should be. And once you've fine-tuned things, you actually might be in a position where you're able to tell people what's on your mind, even pushing a particular philosophy or a political viewpoint, or maybe a certain spiritual view. So that is something you might want to do. And I understand that that's not typically Capricorn, but I think today that's something you can get away with. I think that if you've got a different view, a belief system, and you've worked it through and you've sort of ironed out the problems, then I think people will be prepared to listen to you. And it may be a time to actually ask yourself, what is wrong with the world? What kind of belief system do you need to engage with the world and its problems? And then once you work that out, being prepared to actually articulate your views. That's okay. Aquarius. Aquarians are certainly aware that it's a complicated world. There are lots of things happening, and it can be just difficult to keep track. And you might come to the view that there's really no point in interacting with it short term. And remember, there is a conjunction between the Moon and Mars in Taurus. So that conjunction between Moon and Mars is, where you are putting your energy. And I think at the moment, Aquarius, you are putting your energy into things that you trust, things that you know. You don't want to throw your energy into things that you don't understand. And you might be of the opinion that most things out there are difficult to understand. So you might not want to go places today. You might not want to take risks. You just want to be comfortable in your own space. And I don't think you'd be wrong. And if something is worth doing, something is worth really putting your energy into, then maybe you should be doing it at home. You don't have to go places to express yourself, to be useful. Where you are is where you are, and that's fine. And you should take advantage of every opportunity to stay put. It's better probably to make a phone call than to visit people. It's better to talk to people on Zoom. If you're working, then probably it's a good idea to work at home. That might be best. Though be careful, because conjunction between Moon and Mars can indicate a bit of family strife. So if you are at home and you've got other family members around you, or may not be members of your family, I don't know, if you share living space with other people, whether or not you're related to them, there is a chance that someone gets annoyed. It really is possible. Maybe you getting annoyed, probably you getting annoyed, but it could be someone else getting annoyed. And it really needs to be a question of live and let live. You have to understand the people around you, as I said, especially if you know them well, if you've got used to them. I suppose it's said, isn't it, that familiarity breeds contempt. When you know someone really well, you start to understand their weaknesses, you maybe take them for granted, and that can be a problem. But it's all unnecessary, because the moon might be making a conjunction to Mars, but it's also making a sextile to Venus. So if there are any domestic aggravations today, which I think there could be, then you are able to smooth those aggravations over. Shouldn't be a problem. The moon is actually not just making a sextile to Venus, it's also making a sextile to Mars. Let me say it again. The moon is making a conjunction to Mars, it's making a sextile to Venus, it's also making a sextile to Saturn. And that moon sextile Saturn is going to really allow you to create real stability. And that moon sextile Saturn, okay, it's going to be more the case if you're in the Americas, but I think in Europe you should feel it by the end of the day. And so if there are problems, disagreements, particularly family disagreements, then I think that you should have no difficulty dealing with the problem. And in fact, I think you can turn the whole thing round. And Aquarius, you are, I think, in a position to create real harmony. Pisces, you've got things to say. I think that you are going to be able to communicate pretty well, and I think that you will also get the balance right. You understand that people have their limits, and if you upset them, they're going to get annoyed. But that's all quite unnecessary, because right now the moon is making a sextile to Venus. And with that moon sextile Venus, you're going to be able to communicate in a harmonious way, but also in a way that is quite dramatic, because the moon is going to be conjunct Mars. So you can get the balance right. You can be harmonious, but you can also be assertive. So you can get your point across without causing offense. So if something isn't quite right, then don't worry about it. You can make it right just by saying the right thing, doing the right thing. That should be fine. Though with that moon conjunct Mars, be a little bit careful if you are traveling today, especially if you're traveling short journeys which perhaps you don't even need to take. You could in theory walk, you could in theory postpone the journey until tomorrow. But if you feel that you absolutely need to go somewhere and it's just a couple of miles away, what seems like something simple could turn into something more problematic. I don't know, maybe it's a traffic jam, or just something happens, or you get distracted as a diversion. So if you are taking short journeys today, just be careful and don't get annoyed, and allow plenty of time. And I suppose if you're driving, keep your eyes on the road, and that way I think that you can stay out of trouble. Though, I don't know, I think in most cases you should probably avoid taking unnecessary journeys, because there are so many ways of communicating. You don't have to get in your car or get on a bus, however you transport yourself. It can probably all be organized from where you are, for example, by the phone or by the internet. You don't have to take the risk. It's always a risk driving, isn't it? I think driving, it's a dangerous activity, isn't it, driving? People take it for granted, but it can so easily go wrong, particularly when Moon is conjunct Mars in Taurus and you're a Pisces. But I don't want to frighten you. I'm not saying anything bad is going to happen. On a different note, Pisces, today you are actually quite clever. I mean, you're always clever, but I think you're cleverer than usual. And your abilities, your many abilities, they're all available to you. You can bring them out with complete ease. And so it's important that you don't doubt yourself. Now, even if you are spending the whole day alone, and some Pisceans might indeed be inclined to spend a day alone, there's actually nothing wrong with that. Even if you're doing that, you can bring your talents out into the open very easily, whether it's artistic talents, business talents, entrepreneurial talents, even social talents. They are going to be clear. You can perhaps demonstrate them just by what you're talking about over the phone. When you're talking on the phone about your favorite subject, some subject that you find really interesting, that you've perhaps got experience with, the way you talk about it, your ability is going to be absolutely obvious. And so maybe, Pisces, it's a time when you're going to perhaps realize that you have recently been underestimating yourself, and that something that you hadn't really taken seriously could actually become part of your life if you were to give it a chance. So those are my forecasts for the 12 signs, and now I'm going to look at today from the perspective of the I Ching. So I asked the question, what is Monday going to be like for those watching the I Ching section of this video? And the first hexagram I got was hexagram 15, which is modesty. So on the surface with this hexagram, the idea is that we should not try to boast. We should not adorn ourselves, try to get attention. We should just do things in a way that is simple and unostentatious. And that seems fine. But we have to remember that modesty can sometimes be taken too far. Modesty can actually be used as an excuse for inaction. You know how it is when you tell someone to do something. You say, "Oh, you're very clever. You can do that. You can do this," and they say, "No, I'm not going to do it. I can't do that. I don't have the talent. I don't have the skill." What's actually going on then? Is that modesty? Modesty, I suppose, can actually be a mask. It can actually be a mask for cowardice or laziness. So we shouldn't see modesty in itself as being a virtue. We have to actually understand what is the underlying reason for modesty. And we have a moving line here. We have one moving line, which is the fifth from the bottom is moving. And so with this moving line, the advice is here to not get too caught up in one's own modesty. We need to do what is right. And doing what is right is not about showing off. It's just looking at the situation from an objective perspective and taking action. And it does seem that there is a situation where we need to assert ourselves, where we even need to be I won't say aggressive, although the I Ching uses the example of invasion. It's actually telling us to do the invading. That sounds not very good advice, because the enemy is corrupt, needs to be defeated. It's not about our ego, it's just something we need to do. So in terms of our everyday life, something isn't right, maybe someone is doing something they shouldn't be doing, and it's not a question about modesty. You know, the modesty might incline us to sort of say, oh, well, we can't do anything about it. We don't have the talent. We don't have the ability. We don't have the strength. No, it's not about that. It's about accepting what our duty is. And so we mustn't allow modesty to stop us taking the initiative if the initiative needs to be taken. And I think that it does need to be taken. So we shouldn't worry about it because it is the right thing to do. And this hexagram, modesty, because the fifth line from the top, from bottom is moving, transitions to a second hexagram, which is hexagram 39, which is obstruction. And so when you've got obstruction, you have a situation where you can't move anymore. You try to get something done, but you get stuck. So what do? You could retreat, or you could get help. And I think this feeds back into the previous hexagram that was modesty. So in taking action which may be difficult, which may eventually lead to obstruction, in taking this action, we need to have the humility to be able to get help where necessary. And humility and modesty are perhaps connected there. So we're modest. We understand we can't do everything on our own. And so we try our best to get things done on our own. We do what we can. And when we've reached the limit, we get help. We get advice. Okay, we could retreat. Like the I Ching does give that as an option, but I'm not convinced that that is the option we should be taking when we hit this obstruction, when things start to go wrong, when we can't move anymore. We just get some help, and then I think that things will start to progress again. So that's it. I wouldn't have said it's a particularly dramatic reading. So modesty is good, but too much modesty, not such a good thing. Okay, so let me now look at Gretchen Whitmer, who is governor of Michigan. And some people are speculating that she might be a replacement for Joe Biden. Of course, we don't know what's happening. I read somewhere that Joe Biden was spending Sunday with his family, trying to work out what he's going to do. I don't know. So this governor of Michigan, she's a very establishment figure. As I said, to the manor born. Her parents, worked in the state capitol. Her father was head of the Michigan Department of Commerce. Her mother was an assistant attorney general. She was actually born in the state capitol. So she's familiar with the whole thing, and she's very much part of the system. So she's someone who should find it very easy to work at the highest levels in terms of democratic politics. And you can see why people might have thought that she was, or they still think that she might be a suitable candidate to be president of the United States. So let's have a look at her horoscope. So here's her chart. There we are. Born August 23rd, 1971, in Lansing, Michigan. And elementally, it's quite a balanced chart. It's not a chart, by the way, that I find particularly interesting. But there are a couple of things that I can't help but notice. Moon conjunct Uranus on the descendant. Now, Moon conjunct Uranus on the descendant, I do find that to be somewhat problematic for a number of reasons. If you compare this with, the USA chart, the USA has Uranus on the descendant. Remember how that works? Uranus on the descendant. USA projects so much. It sees terrorism everywhere, but can't recognize the fact that the United States itself is in many respects a terrorist country that, since the Second World War and probably earlier, has destabilized the world, has been involved in assassinations, has helped destroy the German economy by blowing up the Nord Stream 2 pipeline to try to disrupt the flow of gas from Russia to Germany. So there's a strong level of projection there. And if you look at Joe Biden's chart, here's Joe Biden's chart. Joe Biden has Uranus on the descendant. Do we really want another person as president who's also got Uranus, on the descendant? So that Uranus on the descendant, to me, is a red flag. And Uranus on the descendant has other features. Remember Indira Gandhi, the Prime Minister of India? She had Uranus, I think, exactly on the descendant, and she was assassinated by her bodyguards. Louis XVI had Uranus on the descendant, and of course he went to the guillotine. And so I think we were already seeing some evidence of her Uranus on a descendant in terms of the 2000 kidnapping plot. Now, I don't know what the real details are. Maybe it was exaggerated, but Gretchen Whitmer is, of course, an establishment figure. She does things the establishment way. She was an enthusiastic supporter of the COVID lockdown. I'm not going to comment on the COVID lockdown. My views on COVID are pretty mainstream. So apologies for that. But, I do try to avoid conspiracy theories. But I don't know, maybe I'm just being naive. I've been vaxxed a lot of times. I want another vax. I haven't been vaxxed for a long. I'm actually feeling nervous that I haven't been vaxxed myself, but that's just me. But anyway, a lot of people in Michigan were upset with her lockdown. And in Michigan, I've never been to Michigan, but I think it's an unusual state that you have. On one hand, you've got a lot of liberals in Michigan, but in the backwoods, there are survivalists, libertarians, and so it's a very divided state, I think, perhaps in terms of the rural and the city, and the rural and the urban parts of the state. And it is actually, it's a purple state, it's a swing state, it's a kind of state that Biden is going to have to, or whoever if she's the presidential candidate, the Democrats are going to have to win Michigan. Likewise, Trump is going to have to win it. It's an important state in terms of the electoral college. But there was this group of people who were upset by her COVID, her lockdown, and there was this big plan to kidnap her. Now, I don't know how realistic this plan was, that they had scoped her home, her vacation home or her second home, I think it's on some island. And I know that people might say that it was exaggerated, that perhaps the plot never had any realistic chance of being successful, but still it fits her chart. Uranus on the descendant. This is someone who is perhaps going to be vulnerable to this kind of attack or conspiracy. And if you look at the description of this kind of terrorism, it's called stochastic terrorism. Stochastic terrorism. Stochastic represents risk. And so stochastic terrorism, it seems that the only victims of stochastic terrorism are liberals. So let me explain what I mean by that. Stochastic terrorism is when you get people saying stuff like Trump might say things that are provocative, and other populists might say provocative things, and that encourages their supporters to take dramatic action. So through the words of people like Trump, or maybe in the UK of Farage or Le Pen in France, this is the liberal narrative. But when people say this actually increases the chance of a terrorist attack happening. That's what the word stochastic means. It's like with radiation. You have the physical damage from radiation and you have the stochastic damage. The physical damage from radiation is when your cells get literally destroyed or mutated by a large amount of radiation. If you're working in a nuclear power station and there's a huge leak or something like that. But then there is the stochastic damage that we are all affected by, the natural radiation. When you go to the dentist, the x-rays, there's always a small chance that x-ray you have will lead to a cellular mutation which will give you cancer. So it's the stochastic damage just represents the increased chances of being a victim of terrorism. But it only happens to liberals, supposedly. But of course it doesn't. For example, Robert Fico, who was shot recently, arguably he was a victim of stochastic terrorism. You had all this obsession with Russophobia, this support for Ukraine, monolithic support for Ukraine, and as a result of that, it sort of radicalized certain people. So people who are obsessive supporters of Ukraine might be inclined to shoot Fico because of all of this anti-Russian rhetoric. And so that is an example of stochastic terrorism. Although if you look at stochastic terrorism on the internet, it's seen as something that only liberals are victims of. But in fact, people can be victims of it on all sides of the spectrum. Sorry about that. I thought I'd just get that rant in. So her Uranus conjunct the descendant, I think, is a problem. And I think that if she were to become president of the United States, she's likely to be dangerous. I mean, Biden is dangerous. We've already seen what's happened with Biden. Do we want someone who's got Uranus on the descendant again, like Biden? And we already know about her pronouncements. She's supposed to be governor of Michigan, and she's supposed to be focusing on what's going on in Michigan. But she has gone out of her way to make pronouncements about Ukraine. She's visited Latvia already to support American troops there, or maybe it was the National Guard of her state that went to Latvia. I think in 2023, she talked about recommitting ourselves to supporting Ukraine's struggle for its freedom. So she is a vocal advocate for America's continued war against Russia via the Ukraine proxy, for its proxy. And I think that so as she becomes president, this is not good. It's just more of the same. So that is a problem with her chart. I'm also very worried by her sun. Her sun is at 0 degrees 16 Virgo. So you might go, well, so what? She's got sun at 0-16 Virgo. Well, she goes out of the way with her state, her with what she's saying to support Ukraine's supposed struggle. So she's really into Ukraine as far as I can see. And she's got her sun at 0 degrees Virgo. Well, let's have a look at Ukraine's chart. Here's Ukraine's chart. Ukraine has got sun at 0 degrees 56 Virgo. So she was born on August the 23rd. And Ukraine was born on August the 24th. In fact, Ukraine was born the day after her 20th birthday. So she has a natural affinity with Ukraine. And so having this woman as president of the United States, and if the Ukraine war is still going on, we could expect more of the same. And I think that she's probably a threat to world peace, just by looking at this. And we don't have much to go on. I did also look at her astrocartography, and it's not Ukraine that astrocartography shows up with. It's actually Israel, and here is her chart. Here is Gretchen Whitmer's chart relocated to Jerusalem. So you'll notice that Mars is conjunct the descendant. So in terms of astrocartography, she's got her Mars line going right through the Middle East. So let me just show you what I mean by that. So astro map. Let's find Israel. There's Israel. Oops, that's far too complicated. Do you see this? Let me just make this. No, that's got two. That chart has got far too many lines on it. Let me give you a chart which has got a few, not so many lines on it. There we have it. Okay, there it is. So you see this yellow line. These are all the parts of the world where when she was born, which have Mars on the descendant, and you can see that Mars goes right the way through northern Israel. So I'm not expressing any opinions on the conflict in Israel, the Gaza conflict. I don't want to express any opinions on the Gaza conflict. I'm just pointing out that she has Mars on her descendant. Now, I think that, from what I know, that she has been quite fairly vocal in supporting Israel. So certain elements of the Democrat Party might not be too happy about that. And I think that with Mars, if she became president, with her Mars moving right the way through Israel like that, I think that her actions might really stir things up. Now, that's not because she's too sympathetic to Israel or because she's going to be not sympathetic enough. As I said, I don't want to express any opinions on the matter. I'm quite happy to express my opinions on Ukraine, but on Israel, I kind of want to hold back on that a bit. I do have opinions, but that Mars, it's not about whether she's too pro-Israel, not pro enough. It just may be that her actions as president of the United States, or lack of actions, would lead to a bigger conflagration than we'd actually have if, say, someone else was president, for example, Donald Trump. But that it may not even be her fault. It's just the way it is that she's got Mars moving on a descendant, moving through Israel. So let's go back to her chart, and so those are some aspects of her chart. So what about other aspects of her chart, her returns? By the way, this is her solar return for 2020. So I don't know quite when this plot was to kidnap her. I tried to work it out. It was all a bit vague, but it was September. I think the arrest happened in September. So this is her solar return for August the 22nd, 2020. So was there a risk of being kidnapped at the time of her in this solar return? Is it indicated at all? I think perhaps to an extent it might be the case. She had Pluto quite close to the ascendant. Pluto is the concept of being kidnapped. I suppose you have the image of Persephone being grabbed and taken down into the underworld, and she has Uranus on the IC. And so you also have, look at that moon opposition Mars. Moon is applying to an opposition of Mars. There was a Mars-Saturn square. This, I suppose her critics might say this is a solar return of someone who is completely obsessed with power and the COVID lockdown. I mean, different people have different views. Again, I must emphasize I'm not expressing any view here, but if you were a critic of Gretchen Whitmer in 2020 and you didn't like what she was doing in terms of her COVID policy, you might look at this solar return, which is set for sort of a peak COVID, and see evidence of it. Mars-Saturn square, Pluto on the ascendant, control freak, despot, trying to control people's lives. Or you could just see it as potentially a victim of kidnapping, perhaps, which leads to the question of whether she is a good presidential candidate. And I suppose the first thing to look at, if you want to get some idea about whether she might be a good presidential candidate, is perhaps any transits she might have at the time of the presidential elections, which are on November the 5th, 2024. So if we compare her chart with that of the presidential elections, we get this. So it is true that approximately on sort of November the 5th, maybe as the results are coming in, I suppose Moon will be, on sort of conjunct her mid-heaven, but I don't think that in itself is a particularly big deal. She's got North Node fairly close to her ascendant, and so that's what she will be having this year. North Node on the ascendant is a good time to be coming out sort of into the public arena, I suppose. But in terms of transits, I don't think that there's anything especially dramatic going on. So I'm not overly impressed with the situation here. So maybe we should be looking at things from a more immediate perspective. For example, the Democratic National Convention. So the Democratic National Convention is on August the 19th, 2024. And this is Gretchen Whitmer's horoscope in the middle, Democratic National Convention on the outside. So the Democratic National Convention is dramatic because it happens at the time of a full moon. So there is the sun at 27 Leo, moon late Aquarius, and Uranus is square the sun. And so this Uranus is opposition her Jupiter. So it's not exactly opposition her Jupiter, but the sun is moving to a square of her Jupiter. The full moon in general is quite close to her Jupiter. So we might think that this is a time when she could be perhaps coming to the fore. I would guess at the Democratic National Convention, her presence is going to be quite major. She'll probably have quite a big impact. I do think, though, having looked at other candidates, a lot of people are going to be very annoyed during the Democratic National Convention. But we should just remember that she's very much an establishment figure, and so she will do her bit. As far as solar returns for her election, so we've got her solar return for 2024. So again, when I say election, we don't know, but is this solar return for her next birthday, August the 22nd, 2024? Does that make us think this is someone who is going to stand for the presidency or be successful as president? I don't think so. I don't think that that is an especially dramatic chart. I wouldn't have thought so. It doesn't make me think that she's necessarily going to be the candidate, or at least that to make me think she's going to be a successful candidate. So let's look at some lunar returns. So here's a lunar return this is a lunar return she's currently in. This is quite interesting. So this is when the moon returns to where it was when she was born in Lansing, Michigan. And notice how Pluto is exactly on the ascendant. So with Pluto on the ascendant, I'm guessing that with what's going on with Biden privately, she is really thinking about what she can achieve. You know, her ambitions are starting to become quite strong here, I would have said. I think that privately she is seriously thinking about whether or not she can become the candidate if Biden were to withdraw. Then there is her lunar return just prior to the Democratic National Convention, August the 8th, and Uranus on the descendant. That Uranus on the descendant, that's a bit tricky, isn't it? She might draw adverse attention. That is possible. It could be quite a stormy time for her. So that is certainly something to consider. And then the lunar return just prior to the election. We don't know what she's going to be doing at the time of the election, but imagine she was to be the candidate. And this is her lunar return set for October the 29th, 2024, just a week before the election. This is not a good chart. Saturn on the IC, Uranus on the descendant, Uranus on the descendant, Mercury moving towards an opposition of Uranus. Yeah, it's nice to have Mercury rising, but that Saturn on the IC, that doesn't suggest a successful candidate. So, you know, there are a number of problems with Gretchen Whitmer. I understand that she's a very ambitious woman. You know, when we were talking about Gavin Newsom, he had Mars-Pluto square in his chart. With Gretchen Whitmer, she has got a Mars-Pluto sesquiquadrate, very close Mars-Pluto sesquiquadrate. People who have Mars-Pluto aspects are very power-hungry, certainly if they're in politics, and so that fits. But I do think that if she were to be US president, I think she'd be a very dangerous president, not least because she'd continue with the Ukraine war if it's still going on. We don't know what the situation in Ukraine is going to be like by the end of the year. But she's a real neocon, I think. She doesn't seem to be a neocon because she's just governor of Michigan. But I think by the time she becomes president, if she were to become president, I think she would be a real neocon. Plus, you've got this thing in Gaza. If you relocate her chart to Israel, just something about her that just attracts aggression and drama in the Middle East. So there are a number of reasons to think that she would not be a good president, and I don't think we're seeing many signs here that if she were to be the candidate, she'd be particularly successful in terms of getting elected. Anyway, I do need to look at Gretchen Whitmer's chart more. I've only just started to look at it. I haven't looked at it into great detail, and I'm hoping that in future videos I'll be looking at her chart again. So thanks very much for listening to this video. I hope you found it of some interest. If you like this video, I'd be very grateful if you were to indicate that you really liked it. If you're not subscribed, I'd be super grateful if you were to subscribe. And if you want to buy me a coffee, there is a link in the description. So thank you very much for listening, and I will talk to you again tomorrow.